You are now tuned into the SoCHiology podcast. SoCHiology is a lifestyle brand that analyzes Chicago culture and connected topics abroad, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The 45th President of the United States, CNN, all these people, they can have opinions about the violence in Chicago. We could talk about O Block and the connection drill music has on street violence. We could talk about children being murdered because of drama their fathers are involved in. We could talk about Terrortown, Inglewood, the west side of Chicago, North Lawndale. We could certainly talk about all of that and the demoralizing effects it has on the people in the city of Chicago. But we cannot forget that it wasn't black people or drill music that started this. It was Italian and Irish immigrants that began terrorizing the streets of Chicago way before the Civil War even began. They're the ones responsible for creating this gang culture in this city. And they, the gangsters that is, had a lot of help from local politicians, the Democratic machine, as it's called here in the city. In many cases, they became the machine. They became politicians themselves. Historian Dilla joins me on this episode of SoCHiology, episode 16, to break down all of this and more. All right, we got historian Dilla with us on this episode. How you doing, dog?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm really proud and happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you. So you know a lot about Black Chicago history. You know a lot about Chicago history. Period. That's what you're known for. TikTok. You know what I'm saying? All the media outlets you've been interviewed on. So it's definitely an honor to have you and to share the knowledge that you got with the SoCHiology audience and things like that. So, you know, here in Chicago, we got a whole stigma, right? The Chirac, you know, that whole stigma with the gang life, the violence, even though per capita, we're not even, you know, near the top, but that's our stigma, you know, and you said something recently. I want to just open this conversation. You said something recently with the murder of the 7-year-old girl that was murdered in the McDonald's drive-thru about 2 weeks ago. You said something on your social media that it was really never a code when it came to gang life. Real quick, can you explain to us what does that mean? Like, it was never really a code. Like, so that means children and elderly were never really off limits?
To be perfectly honest to the question, that would be correct, right? I think there was less places to hide. There was less people in general, less people involved in that sort of stuff. So the need to involve your parents and your kids, it didn't get that far. And it was a little early on as far as black gangs went. It was that way as well, right? Like, no one needed to involve the family of the dude that would snipe somebody from Cabrini Green. That gang went and said, "Hey, nah, y'all gotta go turn yourselves in," right? And so the code we like to think about or we envision back in the day just was more like a thing of proximity, you know. They didn't need to go after your family because you were within arm's reach. But to be clear, families got killed a lot, you know, throughout the history of Chicago. So that never was a thing. They tried not to do it. But push came to shove, yeah, your family would get touched.
Got it. And that's kind of what you meant. Because, you know, even myself growing up, I was under the assumption that, you know, like the reason why the violence now, present day 2021, is a lot worse than the violence was in, for sake of example, 1991, is because a lot more children are being killed now. But based off what you said, it kind of gives a whole nother perspective on it, because they didn't kill kids back then because they didn't really need to.
They didn't really need to.
Which is kind of still sinister as hell when you think about it. Because, like, if they needed to, they would. But they didn't.
You know, the thing about all crime is what I like to say, even about that, how we feel about the mob, how we feel about when time goes on, we start to romanticize it. We're not connected to it personally, so it's real easy to attach some kind of code to form a gang life because we don't know any of the people that were killed in the 60s or 70s attached to gangs, or even the 20s or the teens, right? We don't know any people. We're not necessarily related to these people, so it's easy to disconnect ourselves and to we only got the newspaper articles and the movies that were disseminated from that time to kind of give us the code. But make no mistakes about it, man. If you were with your wife and kids and they pulled up with that Tommy gun in the early 1900s, your families were hurt.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of 1900s, that's kind of segues us into, what I want to talk about on this episode. Again, back to that stigma of Chicago gang life and the violence. Trump made a whole ordeal about that in the media during his presidency about how Chicago was just a problem. Lori Lightfoot, get your city under control. Rahm Emanuel, get your city under control. Chicago ain't never been in control. So I would love for you to shed light on us about how Chicago violence has always been, like as far as back as it's been reported.
It's all right. As far as back as that, there's been Chicago. That's been the thing. There was a guy named Cassius McDonald, who in like the before 1840s, right? Not only is he Chicago's first quote unquote gangster, right? He's an Irishman. He's the first kind of person to organize the immigrant Irish and have like a criminal enterprise. But then he also goes on to be like the first Democratic ward boss from Chicago because the two go hand in hand. Chicago gang history is intermarried to politics in a major way. The politicians, since the very beginning of Chicago, recognize that, hey, these guys in this neighborhood control this neighborhood. So I can get them to control the people in this neighborhood to vote for me. And they very early on funded neighborhood gangs, which in Chicago's history was primarily Irish and Italian from its existence. And they were violent gangs. I was just telling a story about the guy, Sam Cardinelli. The Cardinelli gang in Little Italy were robbing and killing folks from 1915 to 1919. His second lieutenant, a guy named Nicholas, ended up getting caught. Man, this story crazy.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so Nick it's exactly what we see now, right? We talk about Yummy. We even talk about the 13-year-old Adam who just got killed. The older gang influence. So Sam Cardinella had a pool hall. Young Irish and Italian immigrants would come to that pool hall, ditch school. He taught them how to rob, how to kill, and that's what they went out and did. And for 6 years, they terrorized the neighborhood called Little Italy. They eventually get caught. Somebody squeals. The youngest of the crew, a guy named Nicholas, is 18. He had been involved with the crew since he was 14. They all end up just in Chicago, boy, they hungry. So they all end up getting convicted and sentenced to death. Nick was, like I say, was a kid when he started, so he never really put on weight. And when people get hung, they want their neck to break. So if people on exactly, when people are on death row, they eat their butts off because they try to get fatter. So that way, when they hung, it'd be over with quick. You didn't want to strangle. But Nick ended up strangling because he was light. What was different about it this time, though, was when he was finished hanging, an ambulance asked for him instead of a funeral car, which was a traditional thing. Turns out Sam Cardinelli had an ambulance there to see if once a person was hung, if they could get revived. And it worked. They were able to revive Nick back to life in the ambulance on the way somewhere, and they ended up shooting him in the head again to be the snitch. So that's the level of Chicago gang violence. But it's been that way. That's who controls the vote. So the politicians will say, hey, I need you run this neighborhood. Hey, the police aren't going to bother you. Nobody's going to bother you. I get to pick who the police captains are in my neighborhood as an alderman. And you get people to vote for me, and I'll make sure your criminal enterprise doesn't get touched. And that's been that way in Chicago since 1850, before black people were a thought. We were 3% of the population then, if that. We've been in Chicago since 1852.
And, that's because I'll be honest with you. This is my first time hearing about this Cassius McDonald guy. So it just goes to show you, even with my perspective personally, how ingrained gang life is in Chicago, but not only how ingrained gang life is, but how intertwined gang life in a democratic machine is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's kind of like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and we still dealing with some of the similar things. So, so we're at 1850. That's as early as we can go back as far as
Yeah.
gang life in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then, you had that, what was his name? Sam
Cardinella.
So, what about, were these guys, were they on the south side, the west side? What part of the
Well,
region are
so
we talking
Little
about?
Italy formerly
Mm-hmm.
sits where UIC is now.
Correct.
It went all the way to Harrison, down to Taylor Roosevelt. So in that era, but Cassius McDonald. So before 1900s, before the Columbia War Exposition of 1893, Chicago doesn't go as far as south as we think, as far as like South Side, right? What would be considered the South Side in those days was Roosevelt, and it stopped at about Pershing. After that, that was the town of Lake until about 1898. So then the early 1900s is when you start to see the North Side, South Side gang things start to evolve because that's when we finally get the North Side and the South Side. Everything north of North Avenue belonged to a town of Lakeview and the town of Jefferson. They didn't get annexed into Chicago until about 1898 or so. So it's not until the 1900s that we have that, as we traditionally know it today, North Side and South Side.
Okay, that's when that emerged, and
that emerges.
And when the North Side and South Side became a thing, was it strictly like a Italian Irish thing? Because we know like all of these different ethnicities, countries, cultures, whatever you want to call it, clashed, right? And the blacks ain't even involved at this point, even though they were, but we ain't even talking about them right now. Was it strictly an Italian Irish thing, or was it strictly a geographical North versus South thing?
Because of the way that Chicago sets itself up, it was an ethnicity thing because we live in Chicago next to our ethnicities. So just by happenstance, the neighborhoods develop. And you have it being that it's a ethnicity thing versus like, whether you're Irish or Italian, if you're on the South Side, we running together. No, it was definitely based off of ethnicities during that time.
So basically, like, even if I was in an Italian gang and you was in another Italian gang, we were seen more so as allies instead of enemies. It was like the Irish was the enemy or the Jewish was the enemy.
That's correct. For the most part, and until you get to about Prohibition, and then the Italians start wiping out any other Italians. So before that, exactly what you're saying, it was whole Italian cliques, right? It was other Italian cliques on different sides of the town, but you was Italian, Italian, we were cool up until you get to that Prohibition money. And then that's when it was like, everybody needs to merge up under my particular umbrella. But yeah, if you were on the north side and Italian, I was on the south side and Italian before Prohibition, we probably wouldn't have no beef.
Is that how Johnny Torrio rose to power strictly because of the Prohibition era? Like, how did he get such a firm control on the south side?
Well, Johnny Torrio was his sister married. Yeah, his sister married Big Jim. Yeah.
Okay.
And when his sister married Big Jim, Jim was a protege of Chicago Democratic, machine, as we call it, right? He grew up as like a vote getter for a guy named Hinky Dink and another guy named Bathhouse Johnson. They were aldermen from the late 1800s all the way to like the 1940s. They were city aldermen. And so he started under them, able to make sure that their votes and they were able to get their candidates in. And Torrio came from New York. And, New York had been dealing with that type of environment a little longer than us. So Torrio just brought like an expertise that Big Jim didn't have. It was Torrio that got it started for him. Big Jim was just like basically.
So basically, Torrio was like, got you. So it's like Torrio was more fitted for this gang shit.
Yeah, Torrio understood gang. All Big Jim knew was pimping. But yeah, exactly. Torrio knew, territory and how to like get dudes under you with morale and you know how to insulate himself and the organization structurally. It's like you exactly how you just described it. All that gang shit came from Torio.
And then on the north side, how was things rising on there? Like, cause like we're getting to the north side, south side war, you know, all of
Yeah.
that. But like, so we see what's going on the south side. How was the north side formulating and, you know, just shaping up during this pre-prohibition era, early prohibition era?
The north side um, only had a few pockets, right? It didn't. So what we today consider like the Cabrini Green area, that's like near North Side. That was a strong hang on for gangs, and then also like, is that what we call that River North? You know, like maybe the west end of Streeterville. But as far as North
Mm-hmm.
Side gangs go, they had a little section in Uptown. They had a
Okay.
tiny, tiny section at Rogers Park. But because the South Side was so new, what developed as a newer place, the housing and everything, the gangs was able to take over a little better. The North Side was already kind of old and established. The politicians didn't really have a need for gangs to get people in to vote right. They already kind of had a prestige, if you will. So it was only a few
Mm-hmm.
pockets of gangs on the North Side.
So what it sounds like is the north side always been the quote unquote good side, you know, and I don't really like
Oh
to say good
yeah.
side, but you know, if we're gonna be real, you know, we want to look at like you know, we like to blame politicians for protecting the north side, right? You know, but it seems like it's always been that way. Even with the
Yeah.
whites, you know, the north side has always been like, oh, dude, you don't come up here with that mess.
Yeah, you know, it's older, it's more spread out. It just was a little bit more developed as neighborhoods, right? So old money don't tolerate certain shit. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the money was older up there. So yeah, it was always a bit of a goody two shoes, and that's what kind of made it perfect for whatever game that controlled it. You could theoretically have control over this big vast space of land, but not have to put people in so many places because it wasn't a naturally violent with the bullshit type of place like the South Side was.
Mm, and that's very interesting because you know you would think that with all the violence that used to occur in Chicago back then, you know, people just pulling up with Tommy guns, dressed in 3-point suits and shit, that it was the Wild West everywhere. But when you really look at the history, it's like the apple don't fall far from the tree.
Yep.
You know, and it's just kind of like, can you really blame people in 2021 for the way things are when this is how things have always been?
And can you blame them when you never really speak about how others were able to like pivot and go the other way? Like I said, if you for us, if you survive the street, you know, it's contemporary, right? If you survive the street bullshit and get to a certain age,
Yeah,
um, in the hood, we kind of look at you as like a retired legend, but you still in the world are like are still a scumbag, you know. But take a person like Sam Giancana. You know,
okay.
he was in the news every day dating people, and he was a known killer, but he had lived long enough to move past his youth of being in the streets per se, and now he was above it. But you know, people outside of Chicago still, you know, your average white person still look at Lil Durk as a just a regular thug dude, but he has ascended past it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was just like that back in the day. Like I said, the Cassius McDonald's. I could name a lot of people who started off in the streets in the late 1800s, early 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, and they go on to be aldermen or their
Mm.
children go on to be aldermen and stuff like that. And then that's how you get to move that neighborhood or that ethnicity or that particular small group out of the bullshit. But ours, like, you know, Larry Hoover's son never gets to be anything but Larry Hoover's son, right? Or his grandkids, you know, they fuck around
Yeah.
got to change their names before they'll be able to get to be a positive thing. But that don't happen. That didn't happen then. You
You know,
know.
you make a good, interesting point, and I want to touch on real quick. You said there were gangsters whose sons or grandsons became aldermen.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
can you give us a few names? Because like we know for a fact, or if you don't know, I'm going to say it now. And obviously, you're the historian, so you can clarify. We know the boss, right?
Right.
And we talk about Big Daily, Old Daily. We know he was involved in, they called them what, clubs, right? But they was really gangs. We know he was involved in an Irish gang.
He was the president of the Hamburg Club.
The president, and we know that club was very instrumental in inciting the 1919 Chicago riot. And he went on to be the second longest tenured mayor in the history of Chicago, only passed by his son. So you look at that
right now. And again, let me say that I was not there, have not been there. I don't know that anybody currently of the family that I'm going to say right now is involved in anything. But Fred Rhodey and his father, Bruno Rhodey. Bruno's nickname was Bruno the Bomber, and he was considered the street boss for the quote-unquote Chicago outfit in Chinatown. His son was Fred Alderman, Fred Rhodey. But more to the point, to date, in 2021, there have been at least 60 members of the Rhodey family on the city of Chicago payroll.
Wait, how many?
60.
Wow.
To date, it's and like how not scrubs neither, senior, third ranking dude in charge of the water department, fifth from the top in streets and sanitation, since then. Bruno the Bomber got his name. He ran with Al Capone, so he had to have been around in the 1920s. But his son was Fred Rhodey. It was Bruno Rhodey. Fred Rhodey was Alderman Rhodey.
Wow.
And 60 Rhodeys that worked for the city. And
what not necessarily what war, but what area of the city is this that we're talking about?
The Rhodeys?
Yeah.
So New Chinatown wasn't always where Chinatown was. Chinatown used to be Dearborn. So where Chinatown is now was always kind of like a poor immigrant place. So that's where the Rhodey family had been set up. But he was considered 22nd and 26th Street boss.
Boss, so they can be bosses in the streets and they can be bosses in the city council.
Hey, it's Googleable. The Rhodeys, again, the two. I ain't talking about the. It's probably some Rhodey on the garbage truck right now. Ain't got nothing to do with nothing. Enjoy your job, brother. You can't help who your granddaddy was.
Right.
But Bruno Rhodey and Fred Rhodey. Fred Rhodey was convicted and went to jail for 15 years for racketeering and bribery and all that. So I'm not. There's no allegedly with Fred Rhodey. He pled guilty to these crimes, and then Bruno was suspected of over a dozen murders in his time.
Wow. Yeah, they had bodies for days. It sounds like, and it's just interesting because again, they can transition from their life of crime to the life of policy making.
Can 60 of Jeff Fort's, can 60 of David Barksdale's relatives work for the city?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They ain't finna hire them at the Park District. you know what I'm saying? They not even finna work at the Park District. Absolutely not. It's just so insane when you hear those numbers and you can look at the history and the black and white that basically supports the argument. It's just wild as hell. And again, it just goes back to it's in the DNA of Chicago. The Democratic machine is intertwined with the gang life. So we got the Southside gang. We talked about Johnny Torrio. Let's hit on Al Capone. We'd be remiss if we don't talk about him. Obviously, everybody love Al Capone. Pablo Escobar, idolize him. All of that. Let's talk about his stint, and not even just him, but his successors. Frank Nitti and Paul Ricca and all of those boys.
I was saying we get for Capone was pretty violent. He had a decent run, but what he left in place is really was what. And then after he left, though they should be the stars, but the fact that we talk about Al Capone more means that the Paul Riccas, the Tony Acotas did their job. You know what I mean? They did exactly how they wanted to do, not be like their former boss. But as Al came from New York to help Johnny Torrio. When Prohibition started, Big Jim didn't want to sell illegal alcohol. He was fine with booze, and the thing about the Italian gangsters in general. If everybody ain't gonna eat, you gotta go. You know. So they got rid of him, and I think what we don't talk about enough with Al Capone is how we talk about his violence, but he bribed everybody. If it got down, aside from the St. Valentine's Day massacre, he really didn't. You know, it was ones and twos, but it was mostly people involved in the life, and he really his legend has grown to make him way more violent than what he actually was. You know, what he was able to have Mayor Big Bill Thompson in his pocket and the chief of police, and then later on out in Cicero. I think he's a prime example that the money is more powerful than the sword. And it wasn't until he got super violent that they even started trying to even come get him.
Yeah, it sounds like, I had conversations before about Al, and it seems like he was more so just a bootlegger that happened to dabble in violence from time to time.
Man.
That's what it sounds like he really was.
Yeah. Perfect timing, too, because he, had there not been a prohibition, he didn't have the brains to ascend the way that the outfit did in his absence. And so without prohibition, we wouldn't know anything about Al Capone. I love how you said that he was a guy that was very good at prohibition and dabbled in violence every now and again.
And then, obviously they got him for tax evasion, of all things. And
O'Hare Airport, right?
Yeah.
It was Butch O'Hare, who's a World War II pilot, who the airport is named after. But he was like dyslexic or something to the point to where he wasn't real good with tests, right? And, we understand that. So his father was Eddie O'Hare. He said, hey, he was Al Capone's lawyer. Al Capone was like the John Gotti before John Carter. They could never even beat him. They took Al Capone to jail a bunch of times, and Eddie O'Hare got him off all the time. But when he started to fear for his life, especially after the St. Valentine's Day murder, he made the deal that if his son got into the Naval Academy, he would tell on Al Capone. Not only did he tell where the accountant was, where the books was, but then once they started the trial, they had bribed that first jury, and he was going to even beat that. And Eddie O'Hare told that the jury was bribed. They got a whole new jury, and that's what ended up getting Al Capone.
So that's what popped them off. It was, at the end of the day, it wasn't really the fact they got him on tax evasion.
Nope.
It was the fact somebody snitched on him.
It was somebody snitched on him.
He was that powerful. He was that powerful in the city of Chicago, which at the time, it's still a big city now, but at the time was a big ass fucking city.
Man.
And he was still about to beat that charge.
Yep.
Wow. What a chain of events. So he goes away, and now, so let's talk about real quick who was really in charge after that. Was it Frank Nitti or was it Paul Ricker? Who really was the boss?
That's the ongoing argument, right? I don't see. I think initially it was Nitti, and then as time progressed, he started to lose control. Based off of the other moves being made, when Paul Rica and them did that Hollywood move, it's kind of hard to keep your troops when the people under you are making really, really smart, dope power moves, and make the other people around say, well, damn, why he ain't in charge? You know what I mean? Nitti was real conservative in his money making ideas. Frank Rica, just didn't give a hell.
He ain't give a fuck.
He not at all. So I think it evolved to be Paul the Waiter. But Nitti was in charge solidly in the beginning as soon as Al left for sure.
And then it's just kind of like things just slipped through his grips as time went on.
Like I said, he was a person that was against drugs. Rica and them were not. Nitti was a little more racist than Rica and them. So
really?
Rica and them was okay with going in the hood to get money. Was not. And so, like I said, as time progresses, if you're the underboss but you having to pay everybody more, eventually they're gonna start listening to you.
How much of the Elliot Ness saga played into a part in this, or if any?
Man, a lot of Elliot Ness stuff is exaggerated. Like I
Yeah,
said,
yeah, yeah. That's why I was
he ain't
curious.
he ain't even do nothing. Like I said, if they change right at O'Hare Airport, just think that O'Hara's daddy is what did Al Capone. Elliot Ness, um, just happened to be a guy that was just as tenacious as say like Capone was to getting the job done. So he made some good headlines, but he ain't accomplished nothing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
none of his police work did anything.
The Untouchables is a cult classic, and we worship the Untouchables. Sean Connery.
Hey,
All of that. But
speaking of, see, so I just told you, Rico in the Untouchables is not based off of Al Capone. That's what everybody thinks. Rico is based off of Sam Cardinella. That's who Rico's based off of. It's a blending of stories, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the overarching story is about Al Capone, but the character of Rico, the writers and all that study Sam Cardinella first. Sam was like I said, Sam was on the streets. It wouldn't have been no Al.
Yeah. It's like he had that firm grip on the streets. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so let's shift gears to the south, to the north side real quick. We had it's like everybody who was the boss over there got killed damn near. Who do we start out with? Who was the boss over there in the beginning of the north side? And let's go through the succession real quick.
Right. So was Dean O'Banion?
Yeah, that guy with the flower shop, right?
Yes, sir. And right across the street from the church, that church makes so much money off of visitors coming to see the bullet holes in the church. Is that
they still there?
Yeah, the bullet holes are still there.
That's wild.
Still there. Oh, let me shoo my kids away from this door. As you know, I got a tribe of 7.
Yeah, tribe of 7.
The 1-year-old. Oh man. Yeah, the 1-year-old is getting ready to bang on the door. Something ridiculous.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but so was Dean O'Banion, and he didn't have the charge of it for that long, right? That so he's gone by 1920. The same 2 people that did that were involved in St. Valentine's Day massacres are the ones that did the hit. Dean's an example of a person who wasn't playing politics, though.
Explain that.
He didn't have, and chasing down his lineage, there isn't an alderman that he was paying. He wasn't cool with the mayor you know what I mean?
Okay. He ain't had no allies.
He ain't have no allies. So even after he got taken down, where was the police raids? I mean, they made their little show arrests because, like most of the time, a police chief would be Irish, and he would be very upset about that kind of stuff. But where was the show of force from the city? Like, hey, this major mob, again, if somebody was capable of getting to Al Capone and killing him, that person would have been arrested. The opposite gang would have had police problems because of the politicians that he was with. And so I think Dean's problem was that he went at it alone. If he'd have had the proper protection, the police, you couldn't pull up on Al because it was police watching out for him.
Yeah. He was protected, and Dean wasn't.
It went from Dean. Yeah, he didn't have the protection. And Jaime Weiss was just wild.
Man, I read about him.
That's who succeeded him, and Jaime was like shoot first. He was like the damn Avon Barksdale of gangsters.
Yeah, like a Sonny Corleone type. Just
exactly.
Wow, not giving a fuck.
So he got took out later, and then it eventually went to Bugs Moran, who, as we all know, infamously saved his own life. When the ruse happened for the St. Valentine's Day massacre, and they dressed up like cops, he happened to be rolling by, and he thought they were real cops, so he kept driving. Ain't that crazy?
Yeah, it's like hell nah. Like he just kept it moving. Just kept moving. Like, yeah, I ain't see shit.
Yeah, he kept it moving, and being like that saved his life. He ended up dying in jail later though.
It's a cold world. Yeah, so like we had that South Side that, and it's a lot of minor gangs too. Like that Portillo's on Taylor Street.
Hmm.
They got like a plaque on the second floor of a gang from that area. The Gianna brothers or something. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might have to Google it. But it's like a plaque of like 5 gangster brothers from like that area. I'm not sure the name. But they did some business with Capone too. Like I really need to figure out like what's the name of this gang. I don't think it's the Taylor gang.
Yeah, I'm trying to think myself. Another gang I'm thinking about, Italian gang, is the 42s.
Okay.
When you get past like 1910, 1920s, most white and Italian gangs, Irish and Italian gangs, were like minor league for the organized crimes. And the major one, the main minor league team, right, would be the 42s.
Okay.
They named themselves that because they said they were one better than Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves.
Oh wow.
Graduating from the 42s made you an outfit member. The the precursor to the 42s is the Citrus Cafe, whose first, like, call it graduate, right, would be Tony Arcana. And then the next one would be like Sam Giancana. And he was number 42s.
Oh, so yeah, so they really went from the minor league to the big leagues.
Oh yeah, like, for sure.
Yeah,
that was the draft. You couldn't in that time like just walk up and say, "Hey, I want to be a part of the mob." Like, no, you had to already be doing crimes, already gotten arrested, already have shown what you was capable of. It was like an invite only.
Yeah, like you already had to know somebody that,
Yeah,
and that's how you get in. That's how you get in. The 42s. Yeah, I never heard of them. Now, the gang I was just trying to figure out, I just Googled it. It's the Jenner brothers. Genna, the Jenner brothers. I'm not sure. I don't know much about them, but it's a whole plaque of like all 6 of them at the Portillo's on Taylor Street.
Damn.
On the second floor by the bathroom. You can't miss it. So next time you go there, you can see it. And it's there. But I'm sure they got some type of history, and we can revisit that on the next time. But okay, so we got a nice foundation for the whites, right? We got the Irish, the Italians, because that's what most of all these guys we're talking about are, right?
Right.
Yeah, they Irish or they Italian for the most part. Even the aldermen, the Democratic machine, they're Irish or Italian. The police force, they're Irish or Italian. Yep. Everybody is Irish or Italian with power in Chicago, right? Now, let's go to Bronzeville, okay? Because Bronzeville has always been its own little nook for the black population in Chicago. And while all of this is going on, Bronzeville kind of has its own utopia, dystopia, whatever you want to call it. But, talk to us about the history of organized crime, if you will, or policy, kings in Bronzeville. When did that start? Who, really kicked things off? And what was the succession of control down the line? And how did they even, interact with the Italian and Irish gangs around them?
So that last question is very pivotal as it relates to what happens to them, how they were able to sustain themselves. And that question doesn't get asked a lot. Our first gangster, if you will, African American, was a guy named Mushmouth Johnson. He ran a couple brothels and gambling dens. He was partnered up with a white guy and a Asian guy. And between them, they brought policy to Chicago. So then it gets passed down to, it really was a council. There was about 15 power players. Chief among them was the Jones brothers, 3 brothers that came from the South, moved to Evanston, and then from Evanston came to the city. Their underboss was a guy named Ted Rowe, but then there also was people before them, like Jackson Funeral Home is still open now. It's probably the longest running existing African American funeral home in Chicago, and its founder, Dan Jackson, was a millionaire numbers runner, policy boss.
Really? And we talk about 63rd, right?
It's on 63rd now. Yes, it
Okay.
originally fell down on like 29th and Wabash. Is what
Okay.
the original one was.
Okay.
But yes, that same family started, uh, got their money and started their funeral home from policy. So that takes its origins maybe about it was small runner-uppers, but it gets official and it starts to make a lot of money about 1920, 25-ish. The Jones brothers have control of it by the 1930s. There was a gentleman by the name of St. Louis Kelly. He was the president of the band's union, the Chicago, so everything's a union town. So even blues players belong to unions. The
Wow.
drummer, if Muddy Guy or Buddy Guy, Muddy Waters or Louis Armstrong, whoever wants to do a concert, they had to hire union musicians to back them. St. Louis Kelly was the president of the union's musician. He made sure that union paid tribute to the Italian outfit. So he had been doing that since the Al Capone era, right? Chicago, we had 10 cafes, so the black musicians would go down and perform at white clubs. He was the liaison since the 20s, so that's how he met Al Capone. And when Al Capone, went to jail and then eventually died, he still was the connection. So he was the go-between. And he made sure that they got their money, but he was smart enough to underreport. So, if they was making $3 million in the hood, he come over there with 30,000, screaming that he took this 30,000 from that 300,000. It's like, these niggas ain't got nothing but nickels and dimes. And man, he tried to give you 20,000, but I took another 10 because St. Louis Kelly was smart like that. And he had a personal beef with somebody. I don't want to cheat and use Google because historians don't use Google when we're talking live. That's cheating. But the person that he got into a beef with eventually shot and killed him. And then we lost our go-between. So then the Italian mob needs to, they had to start dealing directly. And it was just coincidence that Sam Giancana and Ed Jones was locked up at that time. Because otherwise, he would, they wouldn't have needed to develop a relationship. So to your question, we did have a relationship with the city, and St. Louis Kelly was the guy that paid the bribes for the city. He paid Big Bill Thompson. In those days, aldermen got to pick who would be like the district commander, right? Inglewood District. So whoever was that alderman got to pick the district commander. And of course, you pick somebody that you can control, and that person would go to the number runners and get the bribes, and then they roll back up. But again, it all ran through St. Louis Kelly. He paid the bribes to politicians and to the mob, and he always underreported. And so nobody knew the treasure that we was sitting on until he was killed. And then that's when the floodgates opened.
Wow, I mean, at least he had that discernment, though. To be like, hey,
right.
like we making $5 million, but you ain't gonna know that though. We made $1 million.
That was our installation, right? Because it still was Bronzeville, it still was Redline, so you couldn't show you had that type of money and build a property outright. You still wanted to mortgage it, but they didn't give mortgages in the hood. So the only thing you could have was like nice clothes and cars and put some money up. Black folks, those number runs, they went on amazing vacations and they sent their kids to college and stuff like that, but they never could have the big house. You see what I'm saying? Because of the redlining, but not having the big house. Like I said, my favorite thing to say to people is you've never seen a picture of an African American in a bread line in the Great Depression in Chicago.
I actually haven't,
Yeah, but you've seen plenty of whites because to the point you're making, we didn't have that in Bronzeville. We just had shitty housing. The only people who was struggling in Bronx, if you was fresh off of the Greyhound or the train from Mississippi, that's like everything else in life, though, right? If I don't know you, I don't know you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the people that was fresh off the bus might have had some struggling in Bronzeville a little bit. But the only issue we had primarily was housing. The Jones brothers legally employed like 3,000 people through their various businesses. That's a lot of people.
It's a very lot of people, especially in that time period. And is this the same time period as Jesse Binga with his bank? Yeah. So
I'm sorry, I ramble. You told me I could ramble.
Hey, and that's good.
Mushmouth Johnson, our first, black criminal enterprise leader, made so much money he was able to send his sister to the University of Chicago, where she became the first African American to live on the dorms. No, I'm sorry. She was the first African American to join a white sorority at the University of Chicago. And when
Okay.
he died, that lady inherited his fortune. And then who did she marry? Jesse Benga, who used that money to open the Benga banks.
And then he used that to give mortgages to black people
Yep.
when they couldn't get mortgages elsewhere.
Yes, sir.
So it's like kind of like just how things are in contemporary times, and we're going to get to that in another episode. But things haven't changed. It's really just following the money in all things, right? Just you the policymakers are paying the bosses paying the police chiefs, paying the mob, or what have you, and it goes all the way to the top. And in Chicago, it goes all the way to the mayor and back down.
Yes, sir.
That's what it sounds like. And it's again like you can't really it's easy for people like a Trump or whatever these Republicans or conservatives say on CNN to we look at O Block, we look at Inglewood, we look at the South Side, the West Side, the violence and all of that, but they forget that this is what y'all built in this city.
Yep, injected it. And it's we're learning nowadays, right, that the traumas from slavery are passed down genetically, right?
Yeah.
And I think that energy can be passed down and permeate a space. If you grow a garden in a certain place and y'all take care of the soil and you plant corn one year and green beans the next, and you keep turning the soil over and you water, you don't over fertilize it, it becomes like real good land. And then people who come after you, their crops grow good too. But I also think like the energy and care and love you put into that space remains too. You know what I mean? And to your point, like in the spaces we find ourselves, before we got there, there were not good energies or good spaces there, and so we kind of inherited that dark cloud.
And it's a very dark cloud. It's an extremely dark cloud because things haven't changed. Things are pretty much the same, but the only difference is it's at least from what we can see, the politicians ain't on the gangster side now.
Right.
And that began to shift a long time ago. So just as a kind of as a wrap up, what would you say is the biggest contrast between gang violence from 1850 with Cassius McDonald up until, let's just say, because there's so many periods, but let's just say for the lack of example, the end of the Great Depression. That era, that whole chunk of time, what would you think is the biggest difference between that chunk of time versus now in 2021?
I think one, we're, I won't even say desensitive to it. I think the difference is it's a little less controlled, at least from where I'm sitting. I don't necessarily think Alderman Anthony Beale is paying somebody to do hits in Roseland, right, or in Pullman, right? Whereas that was the time that was occurring. But I don't think it's much of a difference, brother. I just think that the skin color of the people who are doing it has changed.
Yeah.
And the only difference is that an escape path was laid out for others and none was laid for us. A lot when a place turns extremely violent in the city in those days, you only just had to survive that generation, right? And but if you didn't choose to join the 42s or the gay lords, if you were Irish or something like that, right? You just went through high school. You still could come out with like a really, really good gig and move and continue your life. And I think for us, that's not the case. Like you're inundated in it a little longer. And so the proximity of it kind of sticks with you, right? For them, once you hit 20 or something like that, like people people, 20-year-old Irish people didn't approach other 20-year-old men and ask them what set you from. There was a path laid for escaping that, and I think for us, we don't have a path to get out of it.
Yeah,
Would be the difference for me.
Yeah, and the next time we chat, we're going to transition into, the 50s, 60s, 70s with the rise of the black gangs in Chicago and, what was their purposes and how things went from that into what we have now.
Hey, I can't wait, because my favorite thing to say about that is the 50s are perfect, because before then you needed to be a smart black criminal, and after that you needed to be a tough black criminal. And like you say, there's a reason for that.
And we're going to find out why.
Yes, sir.
If you enjoyed this podcast, I ask for two things. Number one, leave a 5-star review. And number two, pass it on to a friend who may enjoy it as well. And don't forget to subscribe to our other podcast, Mogul Motivation from True Stories Media.